what does it mean to plan an exit holistically?
Holistically, there's the tactical side. So there's the things, and I'll share some of those things with your listeners so that they know tactically if they have a business things they should be thinking about. But what I found out now that I'm out working directly with business owners, it's more emotional than any of the tactical work. People started
Mhm.
their businesses because they were passionate about what they were doing. They've invested many blood, sweat, and tears into their businesses. So it is emotional. And that kind of surprised me as I left corporate because I'd always worked in the large corporate, look
Yeah.
at it tactically, run the numbers, take out the sharpen the pencil, do those types of things. But finding out really what kind of holds owners back is the emotional part and the
Yeah.
ability to let go, which unfortunately can make it almost impossible for them to be able to exit their businesses successfully if they haven't kind of backed away from it a little bit and look at it objectively because it is a financial asset.
Hello, my extraordinary women friends. Let me ask you something we don't ask often enough as women entrepreneurs. What is your exit plan? We pour so much of ourselves into building our businesses, our time, our energy, our vision, but far too often we don't think about how we will leave them. And not just from a financial standpoint, but from a place of purpose, alignment, and legacy. Today's guest, Renita Wolf, is here to change that conversation. After a high level career in finance at Fortune 50 companies like Wells Fargo and Hewlett Packard, Renita launched Poe Wolf Partners to help business owners, especially women, exit their companies with clarity, confidence, and intention. She blends rock solid financial strategy with soul centered planning, guiding entrepreneurs to grow, prepare, and let go of what they've built in a way that feels aligned and empowering. In this episode, we talk about why your exit can be just as powerful as your growth journey, what women often overlook when preparing to sell, and how to design your next chapter with purpose and joy. Whether you're years from selling or just beginning to dream about what's next, this conversation will open up new ways of thinking about success and what comes after. Let's meet Renita Wolf. Well, welcome to Extraordinary Women Radio, Renita. It's great to see you today.
Cami, it's great to see you as well.
Yeah, you and I have known each other over the years. I don't think we've ever remembered how we actually eventually met, but I know we've known each other for many, many years, and it's fun to hear your stories. And I'm looking forward to just hearing how you made this big leap into the world that you're in. But this is going to be a great conversation. So let's just start with your story. Let's start with the story. You came out of the corporate world where you were leading finance. You were doing lots of big things in the corporate world, and then you made the leap into really helping entrepreneurs exit their businesses. So tell us a little bit more about that journey of that transition.
Well, how I got here, I was the first person in my family to go to college. And I picked accounting and finance because I knew I could find a job. So, fortunately, I had a very successful career, but I always had this feeling I wanted to do something more. And I was thinking about that now that I've launched my own business. Where did that come from? But I came from
Mhm.
a family of entrepreneurs, and they were more small businesses, but they created their companies. It was in East Tennessee. There weren't a lot of options, and they created their businesses to support their families. So I kind of had that in me. And then when my dad, he was in the Army, he retired, and he and my mom, they each had their own business. So it seemed just natural. Unfortunately, I reached a point in my career where I could go out on my own.
Mhm.
And I decided, what did I want to do? What did I enjoy doing? And I had a background in corporate, 25 years or more and some of that included mergers and acquisitions. And that's what I really enjoyed doing. So I
Yeah.
said, I could make a business out of this and help people in the process because that's what I wanted to do most. Because again, I had achieved what I wanted in corporate.
I didn't realize you came out of the mergers and acquisition space because I definitely came out of that space as well. And it's definitely one where you learn the ups and downs of insides and outs of businesses. So what a great background to have had to make this
Yes.
step.
Yes. Yeah. So that's how I got here. And then when I launched my business, I said, so how could I help people? And one of the things I feel strongly about is that business is really an honorable thing. Building a business is hard work, but it's also honorable in the process because it creates jobs. Companies hire employees, they give back to their community, they do lots of good things as business owners. So building a business is honorable. And how could I participate and help people using my knowledge?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I kind of how I ended up here. And one of the things I think that makes me a little bit different is I bring that objective eye to a business, but I also have that passion and that heart
Yeah,
for
yeah.
business.
And I think that's so important, right? Both sides of it. I mean, we can look at all the linear elements of a business, but it's the heart and soul of a business that really makes it special.
Right. And me being able to come in as a finance person with that background and looking at a business maybe more objectively than an owner is able to, I can kindly steer them in the right direction as to things they need to watch out when they exit their businesses because it is an emotional journey and
Yeah,
there's a lot of tactical things to do.
totally.
But
When somebody's going to sell their business, it's a very emotional journey. Let's
yes.
talk a little bit about you making the leap. I mean, I understand that your parents, inspired you to make that leap, just being entrepreneurs themselves. But when you made that leap, what how did that feel for you? I mean, what was that? It's a big step to leave the corporate world behind, that steady paycheck, to going to start your own business.
Well, fortunately, I had prepared ahead of time. So I'd saved for my retirement. So it wasn't
Hmm.
like I jumped off the cliff. And I don't recommend that to anyone. I always say
Yeah, I
you
don't
have to be
either.
smart
No.
with what you do. But the day I made the decision, I haven't hesitated or looked back once because I'm so excited about the work that I'm doing now. So
Yeah.
I took the leap, but I had prepared, so it wasn't scary. So that's what I'd
Yeah.
recommend people think about.
Yeah, I love that. I love it so much. So you talk about exits being more than financial decisions. I mean, we've touched on this a little bit more. Um, what does it mean to plan an exit holistically?
Holistically, there's the tactical side. So there's the things, and I'll share some of those things with your listeners so that they know tactically if they have a business things they should be thinking about. But what I found out now that I'm out working directly with business owners, it's more emotional than any of the tactical work. People
Mm-hmm.
started their businesses because they were passionate about what they were doing. They've invested many blood, sweat, and tears into their businesses. So it
Mm-hmm.
is emotional. And that kind of surprised me as I left corporate because I'd always worked in the large corporate, look
Yeah.
at it tactically, run the numbers, take out the sharpen the pencil, do those types of things. But finding out really what kind of holds owners back is the emotional part and the
Yeah.
ability to let go, which unfortunately can make it almost impossible for them to be able to exit their businesses successfully if they haven't kind of backed away from it a little bit and look at it objectively because it is a financial asset. At the end of the day, it is a financial asset.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I go back to my acquisition and merger days, and the last year of my corporate world, we acquired 20 companies in that year. And I was part of those integration teams that, would go, first of all, that would go and do some of the due diligence, but then also come back and how do we integrate people into it? And I remember how, especially the CEOs of the companies being acquired,
Mm-hmm.
and even the culture. I mean, the culture of companies coming into a new organization was a fascinating journey, and being able to really welcome them into our organization was, like being respectful of what they had built and what they knew and their expertise and all of that, was just such an important part of that step. And so when you're thinking about, an entrepreneur selling their company, how are you helping them through that journey of, oh my gosh, this is my baby that I have built. How are you
Yes.
helping them, and how are you preparing them?
Well, like I said, how I work with them first is I recommend they get an appraisal of their business, which I help them I have resources and can help them get good market information so they know what their business is worth. So it helps them to prepare for what their retirement would look like, or if they leave their business, or even if they don't retire, maybe it's a good time to leave and they can take that money and invest it someplace else. So first looking at it that way, and then I tactically look at processes that they have. It's the back office things that
Mm-hmm.
aren't real sexy, fun, or exciting, but they're very important. And
Mm-hmm.
and like I said, I'll give
So the
some specific.
processes that are documented and working smoothly and doing what they're meant to do.
Right. And then the succession planning that's happened. But
Mm-hmm.
what I help people do, I feel like I'm not a mother, but I'm like a big sister. I say, okay. And I've talked recently to one business owner who was in the middle of a negotiation, and I just came out and told him, I said, the people on the other side of, we were working with a private equity company and an investment banker. I said, the people on the other side of the table, they do this every single day, and they're going to talk about your business in very objective terms, and they're not going to be sensitive and delicate about it.
Yeah.
And you're not probably going to like that. So, first, I'm on their side of the table. They know I've been there and I've seen it. So, I can guide them a little bit if something I'm seeing is really not normal,
Yeah.
and telling them that that doesn't sound quite right, or we need to take a closer look at this. So, kind of calming them down and helping them a bit. We also involve, obviously, experts as far as like attorneys who do the legal work, but I can kind of hold their hand as a big sister to advise them. Well, you
Yeah.
might want to look at this. You might want to and think of it this way and that way. And so I've told one of the owners that, and then another one, we were talking, and he just came out. He says, I don't know what I'm going to do when I sell my company. And me, as a finance business person, said, well, you could do anything you want. And then I fortunately was able to offer some suggestions, and then it made sense to them, because a big, well, it's like a big blue ocean out there. I'm not sure
Yeah.
what I want to do, but like you had mentioned earlier, mentoring others, maybe investing in smaller companies or other companies, maybe serving on board of directors,
Yeah.
helping, like an incubator, help
Yeah.
launch new businesses.
Yeah.
So helping advise, showing them that there are other things that they can do when they're no longer in charge of everything on a day-to-day basis in their
Yeah.
business.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, our listeners. If they're thinking about, can I make my business an asset that I can sell in the future? What do they need to be considering? What sort of things, what sort of advice would you give to them?
Well, first, do prepare ahead of time. People think, oh, I'm going to walk up, I can sell it, it's a good business. But and the numbers are great, and all of those things look nice if they've built their business and it's running successfully.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the equation. So, yes, a potential buyer would look at that. But another major piece of the equation and what a buyer would look at is the risk involved.
Mm-hmm.
So if they perceive there's some risks, so for example, if there's a large concentration of the revenues coming from just a few clients or a few
Mm-hmm.
customers,
Uh-huh.
that's a risk factor, because if one of those went away, there would be a big chunk of revenue that would
Right.
go with it. Another risk factor, for example, is if the owner runs everything, all the decisions, all the
Mm.
work, he or she is um, really central to it, and no one else could work in place of the owner. That's a huge risk factor,
Yes.
because ideally, this is the extreme end of the spectrum, but ideally, if a new buyer could come in, a new owner could come in, and it's basically turnkey in the business, that it could
Mm-hmm.
continue to run without the owner being present, is
Yeah.
an ideal situation. So those are a couple of things. And something I see, unfortunately, in small businesses, it's not that the business has done anything wrong, but generally the bookkeeping and the accounting is done to maximize legitimately. So tax benefits,
Mm-hmm.
well, that
Yeah.
may not be attractive to a potential buyer, because it may be
They're wanting
loaded
to see
in
the
with a
profit.
lot of expenses, right, of
Yeah.
eating into the profit of the business. So those are just some ideas of things that people need to be aware of and look out for.
And are there certain types of businesses that you feel like really lend themselves better to being an asset that you can sell versus other types of businesses?
Um, that's a really big question, and it covers a lot of different sectors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if it's a business that has a lot of hard assets, um, as far as like property, plant, and equipment, those things are easily valued. Those are less risky because they hold value in their assets. If so, that would be attractive. If a company has intellectual property, so there's
Uh-huh.
patents, trademarks, copyrights in place. So maybe like a tech company
What
that
about
could be.
intellectual property?
And intellectual property would be like patents. So it's some
Okay, it falls in
company
that
that's
too.
like innovative type company that is leading edge. Even some new startups that they build themselves up so that they can eventually sell, and it's the asset is the intellectual property. And Cami, I think what you and I people we run around with
Uh-huh.
and know the most or the best and are closest to are service providers.
Yeah,
And some
totally.
people say, well, the service is me. I provide the service.
Uh-huh.
And in some of my previous corporate positions, I was also worked. We would buy companies with books of business. So it was an asset, it was a customer list.
Mm-hmm.
And what typically happens in those situations, a couple of things. So, what I would advise to a service business is look at the services that you provide and what could you turn into an asset? What could you have as that maybe has a trademark on it, something that you could license? If
Uh-huh.
you have a course, a book, things like that, those are
Uh-huh.
intellectual property.
Mm-hmm.
So, how could you make revenue that is separate from the owner delivering it? And I know that's a challenge, but that's something to kind of keep in mind. And then the other is those relationships that I referred to, the book of business, where the business is relationship based and it depends on that person. And what happens in those situations are still attractive to buyers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and typically there would be what's called an earnout period. So the buyer would want the person who has those relationships to stay around for a while to maintain and transition those relationships to the new
Right.
buyers or people within the company.
Right.
So
Yeah. And they can get really creative in what the terms look like, right? In order
yes,
to make that deal happen. Can you give us
right.
any examples of that?
Um, well, again, in general terms, if you can sell your business and not have an earnout, that's the best way to do because, and it's not possible in all companies, and depending on what the product is and how things are situated. But if
And
you,
by that you mean that the company is going to generate after that person exits, that company is going to generate so much revenue um, to earn that out, right?
yeah, yes, yes, it's kind of like a guarantee. It's a risk. So if someone stays on and they have what's again in the business is an earnout period, part of what they get paid for their company is dependent on as the owner's no longer the owner, but they may really continue in the capacity of an employee for like
Right.
2 or 3 years. And that's normal if it's particularly a service based business. And it's not a bad deal in other transactions if it's what's required to get the deal done. But I always recommend that owners look at it and see working with the attorney how they can not have an earnout period if it's possible.
Yeah. I think one of the things that a lot of women are attracted to when they start to think about this is how can their legacy carry forward? Can you talk a little bit about that? It's like, how can we enable our legacy to keep going after we're done, right?
Yes. Well, when I was talking earlier, I referred to business building a business as an honorable thing, and what I find is all business owners, male or female, but particularly women,
Mm-hmm.
are look at it a little bit broader because we're accustomed to taking care of people, families, children, parents. So we kind of think a little bit different. So to build our business, we've included other people. Typically, I'm talking again in general terms.
Mm-hmm.
And this legacy is to continue after that sale of up to the point of sale. Women will typically look, I don't like to generalize like that, but someone who's maybe more concerned about employees will forfeit money value that they would get back in a
Mm.
transaction.
Uh-huh.
And something I talk to owners about at the very beginning is think about who you might want to buy your company.
Mm.
Because if it's what in the business they refer to as a financial buyer, or financial buyers looking at maximizing their return on investment. So they're going to start cutting out as much cost as they can, increasing revenue as quickly as they can, and look at it that way. But if it's a strategic buyer, so we were talking earlier about some of the software and the patents and things, a strategic buyer maybe look at a company and only want that thing that they're doing because somebody
Uh-huh.
invented it and they didn't have to pay to invent it. So that's a strategic buyer. They would pay above market for that to get that because it fits in nice
It
with
fits
what
into their plan
they're
that they'd
right.
have to build or, create otherwise if they can just bring that in.
Right. So there's
Yeah.
typically strategic financial buyers, but then there's other buyers. There's buyers who um, maybe it's the next generation of people coming up. They don't want to work for corporate. And wouldn't it be nice for them to be able to buy a business, walk in, and they've got a business and
Yeah.
they just keep it going? And that could
Yeah.
be an employee, it could be a competitor, it could be a customer if an owner kind of thinks of it in that context. So there's
Yeah.
other ways, other types of buyers, and something to think about. And
Yeah.
generally, people don't think when they say, oh, sell a transaction, they're looking at getting the most for the dollar that they've invested. And that's maybe not the most important thing. So Cami, coming full circle, I couldn't get away from my business finance, but coming for full circle, it does come down to that legacy that's been created. So if it's like ripping out the heart of a business to sell it, I've seen owners walk away from it and not do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that. I totally get that.
Mm-hmm.
So, what could our listeners do right now if they're starting to think about a longer term, like, gosh, could I sell my business at some point? What should they start doing right now?
Um, well, the first thing I tell them, and this is probably the hardest thing, but first of all, how could you uh, change things or create things at your company where you don't have to be there doing everything on a
Yeah.
day to day
Yeah.
basis,
Yeah.
and start to develop that succession plan? Maybe you have to keep it confidential because people are sensitive about those things, but know who would be your go to
Uh-huh.
if somebody came in and took over for you. So, first, think like that.
Yeah.
And then do the tactical things. Make sure the kind of the or have somebody on your staff who could do this work for you. Of all that stuff is spick and span in the background. Cami, if you've done integrations, you know this. A lot of people look at that and kind of I say that's not important. We know it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, it does matter.
Yeah.
So, and so that's why many owners will postpone it because they don't think it's like a big deal, but it can make something from becoming a big deal if you have really um, nice processes and things
Have
that
it all
keep
documented, and it works. It's
or
repeatable. I mean, I think that recurring revenue is probably an important part of this, right?
right. So if your business allows you to incorporate recurring revenue into your business model, that's
Yeah.
incredibly important because
Yeah.
that's if it's reoccurring, you obviously have a process to get people on board and then
Yep.
it keeps coming in. So for somebody to come in as a new owner to take that over, they can keep it running
Yeah.
that way and maybe even make it better.
Love it. I love it so much. Um, I know you, once your clients are selling their businesses and they're kind of going to this what's next, I know you're actually helping them on that what's next part of their journey. Tell us a little bit how you're helping your clients, the sales done, and they're starting to think, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now?
Yes.
Give us a little bit of a background on what you're doing there.
Well, that's kind of the non-tactical part of it. And I mentioned earlier, I'm uh, I'm a trusted advisor, but I see it as like a big sister. So
Yeah.
talking to them about and listening to them. I'm an
Yeah.
excellent listener. Um, and many women are, and listening to them so they can kind of work out their what they're feeling. I don't have a formalized process, but
Hmm.
having building up to that level of trust where we have those conversations, as I mentioned earlier, somebody coming out, I don't know what I'm going to do if I'm not doing this, and then talking them through it and preparing them and knowing that they can trust that I'm representing them when I'm sitting at that table, not legally, but just on their side, and I work for them.
Yeah.
That's one thing when I started my business, Cami, that it was really important to me coming out of most recently financial services and being a fiduciary for the owner. And what that means is I don't get paid commission. I get paid a flat fee. I work for
Uh-huh.
the owner. I don't participate in the transaction. And many people in this business do. So if a business sale, they get a certain percentage of it.
Yeah.
And that can maybe change their motivation because I
Yeah.
charge a flat fee. I work directly for the owner, and that's all who I work for. So they
Yeah.
know that and that helps build that trust, and that's really important.
That's that partner that you're showing up as the big sister.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's how we do it, and it's getting to that level of comfort where I can have the owner feels comfortable talking to me about those things and knowing
Yeah.
that I work for them. And then one of the things that's everything's confidential. Part of the way we work, there's non-disclosure agreements, so it's
Hmm.
not that I can go out and start talking about things. So the owner's protected about
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
because one of the things I learned, I said, oh, it would be nice to get groups of owners together who are thinking about exiting.
Mm.
No one wants to anyone to know
Nobody
that
wants
they're
to put
things,
that card on the table.
and it's pretty obvious when somebody says it out loud. But
Yeah.
the confidentiality is and
Is really
trust are
important.
really
Right.
important parts of this.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. Totally get that. And as you're thinking about, your what's next in building this, and you've been building this company for what, how many years now? Two?
Just a couple of years, so
Yeah,
it's
just a
not that
couple years.
long.
Yeah.
Yes.
So tell us what this journey's been like for you as an entrepreneur.
Well, breaking out of corporate was first, like I said, I haven't hesitated 1 minute and looked back. But with large corporations, these were Fortune 50 companies, so they're really large, and there's somebody who does everything
Yep.
along the chain. So now I have to do everything, and figuring that out, and knowing what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. I already knew that just by as old as I am, figuring that out. So coming out and making that transition, but I thought things would happen faster because
We
I
all think
do.
that. We always think that. That's
So,
nothing unique.
but fortunately, I had prepared financially, so it wasn't like this urgent
Yeah.
need to had to have income, and I was so excited about what I was doing, and then working with entrepreneurs and learning more about really what they're thinking and what really concerns them.
Uh-huh.
I'm even more passionate about being able to help them. I get really,
Yeah.
really excited and a lot of energy from working with entrepreneurs because, like I said,
I
I
can
came
see
from a
that.
family of business owners, and they feel it. It's really
Yeah.
it's important, and I love just being able to help them, taking all those things I learned in corporate and still being able to be of service and help people.
And it's a huge help. I mean, it's really a huge help to be able to bring your expertise and to help them through such an important part of their career and their own, entrepreneurial journey. It's a really, I mean, having your kind of support could be really valuable. So
Yes.
I'm thrilled that you're doing the good work that you're doing.
Thanks.
What's the biggest lesson you've learned?
Um, Again, coming out of corporate, we are totally data driven. We do
Hmm.
analysis. I
Yeah.
have teams of people who would, uh, employees who would do analyses, and then I would look at those and make sure I agreed. and then finding out that exit planning is really all about the emotions and the heart. And fortunately, I already had that. So I come in almost like a magician because I've got the hard skills, and those are just
Yeah.
intuitive to me.
Yep.
But because of other things I've done in my life, I've spent a lot of time over my career volunteering and serving on boards and working
Yeah.
with nonprofit organizations. So I have that heart for service, but finding out that that's really where the true value of what I do is helping owners get to where they need to be and
Oh my
get there
God.
successfully.
Yeah. I totally get that. As I even, I've been doing this for 15 years, and that was certainly the big surprise for me was how much the soul side of our work shows up for us alongside the strategy. So I always talk about soul plus strategy, right?
Yes.
And the soul part of our work is where the real magic happens. And I think that, that's probably some of the same that you're dealing with here is like an owner going through this experience, helping them with that emotional side, the soulful side of that journey is really a gift. So I love that you're weaving that together.
Yes, it's been very exciting. We don't talk about that soul side of the
Yeah.
things at
Yeah.
corporate, but so it's still not 100% comfortable for me. But when in
Yeah.
one-on-ones, I get really
You get
jazzed and
there.
excited
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. 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 I love that. So, where can people learn more about you and your company?
I have a website, so it's P-O-E, Wolf partners.com. So there's lots of information there. There's also a link if somebody wants to schedule a free call with me just to talk. I'm so excited to talk to entrepreneurs and see what their challenges are and their opportunities. So that's available. And then I also have a free resource that if you're just starting to think about this,
Hmm.
I call it the exit readiness assessment, and it's just a
Cool.
few questions. It takes less than 5 minutes, and it's free, but it's at, and they can find that at powolfpartners.com/ready. So it
Nice.
gives, and it comes back with, it asks some real specific questions. It's all confidential, comes back with a score and gives them some idea of where they're have some strength and maybe some weaknesses
Yeah.
within their company when they're thinking about exiting.
Excellent. Excellent. The final question I always close with is what are three pearls of wisdom you'd like to leave with us today?
Well, one of the things, because we have been talking about business, and at the end of the day, it is about the money and the business as far as exiting a business. But so, couple here, uh, a well planned exit is empowering, especially when it's done on your terms, because you don't want your experience to be rushed or reactive. I've walked into situations where the owner's in the middle of it and it's not fun. It doesn't work all the time. And then number two, it's not about the deal, it's about the departure. So we've talked quite a bit about that today,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
making sure that you're emotionally ready for that and that you know
Yeah.
what's coming along next, and that you are prepared financially using the
Yeah.
proceeds from what you get when you do sell your business. And then number three, buyers don't just pay for the results, they also pay for reduced risk. So that's why all of this stuff
Mm.
that may seem a little bit mundane is so important, because you can then validate, show to a potential buyer that you have these things in place that helps reduce their risk, because if they think it's a risky investment, they'll pay less
Yeah.
for your business.
Yeah. And that
So
that will hurt. That, it's like
yes,
there's taking a whole chunk of dollars out because of that risk. And so if we
right,
can minimize that.
that's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Love
So
it.
thank you.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all your good wisdom today. I really appreciate it, Renita.
Well, thank you, Cabby, and it was nice to learn that we had a shared corporate experience.
Yeah,
So,
totally. It's always
and
that's
I
what I love these about these interviews is like I always discover something new about the guests that I don't know. So it's awesome.
thank you. I've enjoyed being here and learning more about you as well. So, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good day.